Good afternoon. I'm Dalen Fortney, and I manage the social media for the Managing Partner Forum. Welcome to the MPF webinar series, a series of quarterly one-hour panel discussions on important leadership topics. These programs are moderated by John Remsen Jr., President and CEO of the Managing Partner Forum and President of the Remsen Group. Today's session is what every managing partner needs to know about highly effective law firm administrators. And our panel brings Oliver Yandel, Executive Director of the Association of Legal Administrators, along with managing partners and firm administrators to offer their perspectives about the increasingly important roles of law firm administrators to running successful law firms. Handouts for today's sessions are found in the GoToWebinar window on the right of your screen. They will also be at themanagingpartnerforum.org. Throughout the session, feel free to type your questions into the chat window. Questions will be answered as time allows. Finally, we'd like to remind you that today's session is recorded and will be archived on the Managing Partner Forum website. Thank you again for joining us. Over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Dalen, and welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon regarding the important role between law firm CEOs, managing partners, and law firm COOs, firm administrators. Should be a lively and dynamic conversation, and joining us, as Dalen mentioned, is Oliver Yandel. We're presenting this in the Association of Legal Administrators, and Oliver is their Executive Director, and we'll be co-moderating today's session, and we had scheduled two pair of managing partners and administrators to share with us their roles, their challenges, and advice they might offer to other firm leaders. Most of you probably know me and my background. I was an in-house marketer and been at this for about 25 years, do a lot of programming with the Association of Legal Administrators, the ABA, and some of the law firm networks as well. I run the Managing Partner Forum and do some consulting on the side. And many of you on today's call have attended our leadership conference. We present it every year in Atlanta. Our next one will be May 3rd, 2018. We've had about 1,200 managing partners participate, and we set up a very, very interactive, high-level conversation, and hopefully we're helping managing partners in what is a very challenging, often ill-defined role be more effective as law firm leaders. I want to introduce my co-moderator, Oliver Yandel. And Oliver is a lawyer and has been the executive director of ALA for a number of years now. ALA has about 9,000 members across the world, increasingly global, 93 chapters, including a new one in Mexico City. And before joining ALA, Oliver worked at Smith Buckland, a meeting planning organization, as well as IADC, worked for Kiwanis as well. So Oliver's delighted to have you with us and delighted to be co-moderating today's program with you.
Thank you.
Also, my pleasure. Joining us is David Burt. David is the president, outgoing, of a firm up in the Pacific Northwest by the name of Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt. Offices in Portland, Seattle, 5 other cities, 170 lawyers all told. David is a Duck law school graduate and received his undergraduate degree from Michigan State. So Dave, we're delighted to have you on board.
Glad to be here.
And joining David is his COO, and I love the title, Denise. And Denise was previously at the Van Winkle firm in North Carolina. And interestingly, Denise worked in behavioral health services. And I got to think that's helpful working with the lawyers a bit. She has a PhD from the University of Tennessee, master's from Indiana University. Denise, welcome.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Also joining us is Scott Remington, and I love the bow tie. Scott's out of Pensacola, Florida, and they're a mid-sized firm, about 43 lawyers, 5 offices across the Gulf Coast, mostly Florida Panhandle. Scott, looks like you're a litigator, and received his law degree from Florida State University. So welcome, Scott. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here, John.
And finally, but certainly not least, is Gary Swisher, the current president of ALA, Chief Administrative Officer at Clark Partington, working closely with Scott. And Gary's worked at a couple of Florida law firms before finding his way to Clark Partington, and held different titles: Chief Administrative Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and has his bachelor's degree from the University of South Florida, and is also a certified legal manager. So welcome aboard, Gary.
Thanks, John.
As we get in, Gary, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear us okay?
Yes, we're good. Great. Glad to have you on board. You guys are in the same room, is that right?
Yeah, Scott and I are in the same room, correct.
You know, that could be good or bad as we get into today's conversation. And
Yeah.
Dave and Denise, are you guys in the same room?
No, we purposely chose different rooms.
that might be a good idea in hindsight. We'll see. But as we get into today's program, please use the chat feature if you have any questions. We want to make sure that this is addressing what our participants are here to learn. So please take advantage of that chat box feature if you have any questions you'd like to throw at us, and we'll try to weave those responses to your questions throughout the conversation, maybe toward the end as well. If y'all have heard me talk in recent years, I talk about the tidal wave of change hitting the legal profession. Change is all around us. Competition, globalization, the millennials, demanding clients, artificial intelligence, and technology having their impacts on the legal profession. Change is all around us. And many rank-and-file lawyers respond to what's going on out there in this type of fashion. Living in the past, head buried in the sand. Fascinating research by our psychologist friend, Dr. Larry Richard. And if you haven't read any of his material, you should. He examines the lawyer personality over decades of research. And here's his conclusion about who we're trying to lead through change. Lawyers who are skeptical, don't like change and risk, love autonomy. And here our CEOs and COOs of law firms are tasked to try to get everybody rolling in the same direction toward the future. And sometimes it does involve change. So needless to say, it's a tough group to lead. The role of managing partner, law firm CEO, is a challenging one, and the law firm has the role of the COO administrator as well. As we go through the day, our session, we'll be pulling some data from a couple of surveys we've been doing this year at the Managing Partner Forum. We do an online survey in April, and I'm going to share the raw results with our participants today. There's great benchmarking data in there as to what firms are doing in the face of change, in terms of governance and strategic planning, and dealing with problematic partners. At our conferences, we do audience polling technology. There's some good data there as well. And we just wrapped up a joint survey with the Association of Legal Administrators last month, and 254 COOs and administrators weighed in on a set of questions. Great stuff there. And we're going to be combining all this into a report, a white paper of some sort that we'll be distributing later this year, early next year. Hopefully giving mid-sized firms, smaller firms, the perspectives, the ammunition they might need to affect change, leading their firms to a prosperous future. So with that backdrop, let me ask you, Dave, to kick us off. And our format is such that we've gotten together and addressed about 4 main topics we as a panel would like to address today. And the first would involve the roles that firm leaders play, CEOs, COOs. We're going to spend about 8-10 minutes on this. It'll be very, very interactive, very conversational. And I'm going to ask Dave Burt from the Schwabe firm. They're undergoing a change in their governance model. And he's going to share with us what they're up to and how he sees the role of a law firm's CEO in today's marketplace. So, Dave, why don't you kick us off?
Great. Thank you, John. Yes, after 16 years of a shared leadership model, I have a partner who's named the managing shareholder. We're a professional corporation, so I get to wear the title of president, and he's the managing shareholder. We have shareholders, not partners, under our corporate model. After 16 years of shared leadership, we're moving to a single CEO model. We have a nominated partner for that. We'll have a shareholder meeting in actually 11 days to vote on that and confirm that. We have every reason to believe that'll be confirmed, and we'll march forward with a single CEO. That's a powerful signal to the marketplace as well as to ourselves, and a recognition of some of the same changes that John has just briefly outlined. To give you some context, because I think context is critical to all of the choices that we as leaders make. We have to make different decisions every day based on those contexts. In 2000, we had finished the second series of leaders in a traditional fashion of single leaders, the old-fashioned managing partner, and we had about a 10-year reign of one who basically got thrown out for he just lost touch with with who he was leading. We put in a new person. That person was an agent of change for about 5 years, introduced very dramatic concepts like profitability and practice management, and after about 6 years that pretty much wore him out, and he looked around for a replacement, and there was no one like the traditional managing partner. So he looked to the two of us, Mark, my colleague, managing shareholder. We've always laughed. We don't know which one of us he went to first, but both Mark and I rejected the idea at the age of roughly 45 of becoming a traditional managing partner, because we just didn't see how we could maintain a practice, keep relevance in our own personal lives, and do the job that was facing us as the year 2000 came around. So we went to this model, and in doing that, we hired, so to speak, a bunch of our colleagues on a task force, and we went out and interviewed corporations in America, Wall Street corporations, and other law firms over the course of 6 months. This is back in 2000, and we found that there were several corporations highly regarded on Wall Street as well as law firms that actually had shared leadership but hid it, because there was this constant sense that you can't have shared leadership, that shared leadership is somehow destined to fail. Well, we went ahead anyway with that, and we've been very fortunate, at least my partners tell me that we've made some tremendous progress. We have more than doubled the revenue in the firm. We've reached new markets. We now have the largest group of intellectual property lawyers of any firm on the West Coast, including some of the really big people, because of some focused strategic choices we've made. We've done that together collaboratively as a partnership, Mark and I, but as we got to this leadership transition in the context of a strategic plan, a formal strategic plan, our first that we did 2 years ago, it was apparent that the speed at which change is happening and the need to have focus led to a task force, not Mark and me, but a task force of our partners interviewing other lawyers, again, from across the firm, or across the country. We do this as a model. We reach out to our clients. We ask them what they're thinking, and others, leaders in the industry, and we came away with a real strong sense that a single CEO was the right model to go to. So we were lucky with two that could get along pretty well and managed well, but it seemed like the way to fight the ever-aggressive change that's occurring to all of us was to have a single CEO who, together with our strategic COO, Denise, who's with me here today, we think is the partnership of the future, and we're excited about this opportunity we have to make peaceful transition in a way that leaps us forward, kind of an inflection point, to use a fancy term. But we're excited about these next several years that are coming in front of us now under a single leader that will be able to focus every single day on what the needs are of our clients through the firm and through the lawyers, and not have to worry about a practice.
Dave, thank you for sharing, by the way. Many firms wouldn't share that publicly, so thank you for doing that. And how long had you and your counterpart served as the co-leaders before y'all have decided to go to this single CEO model?
16 years.
16. And the new CEO, how did you identify him or her? What skill sets were you looking for? What sort of characteristics were you looking for in that individual?
Great questions. We have done a lot of leadership training here at the firm. we've invested a lot in that, and Larry Richards, that you've already alluded to, has been a part of that. We've based the statistics and data he uses. Frankly, Denise Gaskin is in her training with a PhD and her experience outside the law practice has added that. Denise has a book about many topics and can help us with the data and science that are actually behind a lot of the things we all think are our gut feel. At the end of the day, the evidence really drives that. And so we reached out as a task force of partners in the firm to create the ideal model of someone that can be a change agent, someone that can be trusted, someone that we can have confidence in, but also someone who can look ahead, look around the corner, if you will, and try to keep above the fray, because every single day we all know we get buried with disastrous weather, disastrous clients, machines that shut down, cyber attacks, whatever it could be. Every single day it's a whole different, and yet we've got to maintain a course through all of that. And so by doing that, we look for someone that had that ability to be thought of as a confident person, but also one that would listen and then gather data and then make a decision and execute. Lawyers are famous for the paralysis of analysis, and we wanted someone who we think could follow through on what we've done, which is to decide a course, implement it, and execute. So those are the kind of characteristics we look for. And so we had a formal committee, a large one, reach out. We did lots of interviews. We've touched probably every lawyer and many, many staff people in a process that's gone on for over a year and led to what we think will be, like I said, an acclamation in 10 or 11 days at a shareholder meeting to this new leader.
Wow. You said confidence, listener, make a decision, execute. I find a lot of managing partners want 100% agreement before they'll make a move. They want to be liked. They don't want to ruffle feathers. A lot of consensus building going on, and making decisions and executing, leadership. So I'm proud of you guys. And this new CEO is going to be a full-time role, as I understand it, giving up the practice of law.
Yes. She's been working over the last couple of months to transition clients to good folks, and yes, that's our focus. She'll be eligible for 2 4-year terms, and that's what our focus is on.
That's great.
Perfect. Thank you again for sharing. Denise, I come to the impression that you really are very much a part of the leadership team at Schwabe. And you have a seat at that table. You have a voice. You are pushing change. Talk to us about your role as the firm goes through this change and moves to a new model, and kind of how your feelings are and how you see yourself contributing as the COO of the firm.
So I have a lot of the same responsibilities that probably a lot of the people on this call have in my role as the COO, and that includes a lot of operations, everything from what plugs into the wall to strategy to the crisis du jour, marketing, HR issues, business development, and we have very competent people that run each one of those primary areas, and we work together as a team to make sure that the day-to-day stuff goes well. Hopefully goes better than well, but keeping the trains running and running on time is really important. And as Dave says, you can get very distracted by just the day-to-day stuff, but sort of pulling your head up out of the sand, as your slide showed, and really looking at what's coming is a critical part of my job. With the transition, we have been talking about leadership transition here for almost 2 years. So it's been really helpful in my role that it hasn't been a crisis, and it hasn't been something, we haven't had somebody walk away or somebody be fired. So it has given us the luxury to do this very thoughtfully and very intentionally. And so I've had an opportunity to give input at various stages of this process, and including, we've worked with an outside person to do actually some trait analysis to see the people who had applied, what kind of a fit was that person to what it is that we had decided that we needed at this point in time. I'm really proud. One of the things I'm really proud of with our firm is that we actually took the time to develop a strategic plan before we looked for a new leader. So we said, where are we going? And then that will help us figure out what we need in that person. And part of the strategic plan, one of the things that was identified is that, thankfully, the firm identified that they needed a strong COO. They actually identified that as part of the strategic plan. So that was good news for me, obviously. And then, but you know, I have a big role right now in helping to transition a new leader, and it's exciting. There are going to be lots of cool and challenging things to it as well, because it's a brand new person that I will have to get to know, and we will have to figure out how, you know, what are our strengths and weaknesses and how are we going to go on together. Dave and Mark Long, the managing partner, hired me when I came to Schwabe, so I sort of willingly came into that relationship. So this is definitely a new day with a new leader, and I'm looking forward to figuring out what that's going to look like.
Interesting. You all have a lot of good things going on over there at Schwabe. I like the plan. I like the leadership. It's all good, and sounds like you guys really have a good model you're moving toward. Let me shift gears and bring in Scott Remington. Scott's the president at Clark Partington down in Florida, the Panhandle. And Scott, why don't you introduce yourself? Talk to us a little bit about your governance model and your role as president of your firm.
So thanks, John. We are a approximately 40-member firm in the Florida Gulf Coast. We have offices in Tallahassee, Destin, Grayton Beach, Pensacola, and Orange Beach, Alabama. The firm is a little over 40 years old, and I think it's fair to say that we're sort of in a period of transition as our founding partners, shareholders, begin to phase out. We sort of had 7 lawyers that were kind of the nucleus of the firm for many years, and we're down to only 2 of those left. About 6 or 8 years ago, when most of them were still with the firm, they made a decision to essentially hand over leadership to the younger lawyers in the firm. So we have an executive committee of roughly 5 lawyers, 3 department heads, a president, managing shareholder, and then a secretary and treasurer. We're divided in 3 primary departments, so we try to get representation on the committee from all departments. We also try to get representation geographically from our other offices. The oldest person on our leadership team is probably our COO, Gary Swisher, who's been with us about 4 years. Gary's 50 years old this year. I'm probably the next oldest. I'm 45, and I'm in my 5th year of serving in this position. The current model that we're under is only 5 years old. It's a very collaborative leadership model, and what we were forced to do was sort of select people to positions based on their skill sets, and we've had to be very candid and honest with one another about what we can and cannot do. For instance, I sit down with a lot of other managing partners who indicate that they spend a lot of time on technology and internet issues. I spend 0 time on that. In my role, the best place for me is out in the community, beating the drum for the firm and trying to find new business for the firm and new areas of practice to develop. So my job is largely, or the components of the plan I'm responsible for executing are largely business development and attorney morale, staff morale.
And keep you away from the computers.
Keep me away from the computers, the telephone.
You're like me.
I don't get involved in purchasing. I think that one thing that we have been pretty good about around here, there's obviously always room for improvement, but it's in delegating responsibilities to other people, and people have been very generous with their time. And that has allowed us to maintain practices and maintain client relationships, where if we had one single CEO or single president who did not have a practice to utilize, that they wouldn't have that connection with the client. I think that's a model we've talked about around here. For many, many years, we've been told that we should have somebody in that role, but it's just not something that our culture has been willing to embrace thus far. We did make a very...
Scott, you're practicing law as well as taking on this leadership role?
Correct. I practice about three-quarter. I get roughly 25% credit for my role in management.
Okay.
And then likewise, if there's other areas of management, for instance, the IT, we have two partners that are heavily engaged in the IT management with Gary Swisher under his leadership, and so they get some small recognition for this role, but it's not much. But that's very much cultural around here, and the idea in the firm is that everybody should have a turn in leadership, and everybody should have a role in leadership. And as we grow, that gets more and more difficult because everybody's not under the same roof. So we find, what we have found, I believe, over the last few years is that more and more decision-making authority and more responsibility for day-to-day operations is falling on a smaller group of people. And that becomes a challenge in and of itself, because when you have a culture that, at least for the last 2 decades, you've tried to include as many people as possible in decision-making, when you get to a size where that becomes just not feasible any longer, there are some people that have trouble adjusting. But for the most part, we're doing pretty well in that regard. Communication is always a huge issue around here. You can't over-communicate with your partners, I find, and they seem to enjoy the one-on-one conversations more than emails, but that gets harder and harder with the more attorneys you have. So it's a struggle, but that's another reason we have very strong department heads who make up the executive committee, who are supposed to be responsible for communicating downstream through their departments, so it all doesn't fall on the shoulders of me and Gary.
Well, I think it's great that you all have made that transition from your founding partners, and they have willingly, to some degrees, I'm sure, of variation, stepped aside, giving leadership to the younger lawyers. I see, 70% of first-generation firms don't survive those founding partners. Often they won't let go. And so I think it's great. Sounds like you're well beyond that hurdle and moving toward the younger folks leading the charge. And Gary, you're there, national president of ALA, so you talk to a lot of administrators and have, I would think, a good pulse on the role administrators are playing. Why don't you talk to us what you're doing at Clark Partington in general as well, how you see law firm COOs and firm administrators, stepping up to the leadership role, becoming, indispensable assets to their firms.
Yeah, so over time, I think I've been in the legal field for about 25 years now, and when I first got into the legal field, there wasn't really what we would have called a COO position at the time. There was more of the leadership was attorney-driven on all kinds of levels. But I think over probably the last 10 or 12 years, and even through the recession, I think firms have realized that having a non-attorney business mind is essential for running the law firm, as law firms have become more and more every day like a business. The mindset or the skill set of a good COO or administrator or legal manager that comes in that can understand the actual business side of the law firm is essential now. And that's where I see our positions and my position here at the firm is to kind of understand the big picture, not only the strategic plan that we have in place here, but how does that fit with all the way down to what kind of supplies we buy, to our hiring and staffing issues, or what offices need to that we can bring on board, or what practice areas are profitable, what practice areas we should focus on. So I think our position is a lot more encompassed into the works of how the law firm now has ran versus in the past, where it was kind of a silent position, more of just running the day-to-day operations, or more of just kind of making sure the office opens and closes on a daily basis, where now I think our positions have become a lot more strategic and a lot more involved with the leadership of the firm going in the same direction.
Good to hear. Both the ALA and the Managing Partner Forum are about advancing the business of law. And yes, it's a profession, but importantly, a recognition that we are running a business, and planning and leadership increasingly important. I'm going to share with you some benchmarking data and then toss over to Oliver for our next question. And we asked managing partners of firms, what do you see as your most important contributions in that leadership role? Consensus building, consistently the #1 answer. And at our conferences, we're advocating, okay, consensus building important, but at the end of the day, holding lawyers accountable, leading change, focusing our attention toward long-term strategy should probably be a little higher up than trying to build consensus. Enough managing, time to lead. We also asked, are you having fun in the leadership role? Most managing partners say, yeah, I do enjoy the role. Same question we asked of the administrators. What do you see as your role as a firm leader? And appropriately, more day-to-day, maximizing our procedures, our efficiencies, more operational type contributions, and also involved in making tough decisions, leading change. I think that partnership, when we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between CEO and COO and how to make sure that's good and working. And most ALA members, firm administrators, seem to be having a lot of fun, a lot more fun than managing partners in these challenging leadership roles. Oliver, I'll ask for your comment on these slides, what our panel kicked us off with, and you'll lead us into our next segment. And I'm looking at the time, so we're going to have to kind of wrap it up a little bit. What do you think here of kind of the roles and threats we're seeing out there?
Well, certainly, obviously, the role of the COO in the efficient running of the firm on a daily basis makes a lot of sense. But I share your thoughts on the strategic role of both parties. As you mentioned, consensus building is important, but that often takes a lot of time. And in this time of volatile change, really being able to make smart decisions with data-driven decisions that are in the best interest of the firm is really important, and consensus building sometimes can take a while and may not necessarily always turn out. So we talked a little bit earlier about the roles that the managing partners and the COOs have. And in this time of change and the complexity of those roles evolving, how important do you think it is, panel, that your roles have clearly written and delineated job descriptions that not only clarify what the roles and responsibilities of each party is, but also the skill sets that are required to fulfill those roles? So, Gary, let's start with you. How do you make sure that Scott's focused on business development and not worrying about the computer system?
Right, so that's as Scott is in here laughing, that is the communication I think that we have pretty much on a daily basis. You know, I have mixed feelings on the whole job description thing. I know that the slides have come back and the data has come back that most or at least half believe that the job description is necessary. You know, I think Denise had mentioned this before, and I totally agree with her that, you know, this position that we're in is very fluid, and I don't think you can necessarily stick it in a box and say that this is what our job description. I understand, I think, a list of responsibilities more than a job description, just because each day is different. Each day brings a new fire. Each day brings a new focus, even though there's still some long-term strategic things that go on in the firm on a day-to-day basis. It just depends on what's going on daily and what the focus is at the time. We're getting ready to move to a brand new building in December, and so our focus for this last 6-8 months has been prepping for the move and the new office space and ratios and all of the other things that are involved, which we only probably will do this every 30 years. So it's not necessarily anything that I think we would have put pen to paper, but it's something that we do on a daily basis. And so I try to take as much of that responsibility as much as I can from Scott so that he can still continue to focus on that business development, because we still obviously look at the financial statements and realize that revenue is king. And while you can save some on the expenses, the revenue is really the push. And so we know that that's something that we want to continue on with the firm. So I think it's really just that communication and having a list of responsibilities, but understanding that I think that those lines blur at times. If Scott needs some help in business development, I'd be happy to go out and do client interviews if he did not have the time. So, I think that that's kind of how I feel about that. And Denise may feel differently or the same. I don't know.
Well, let's go to Denise. I know, Denise, you had some similar thoughts on the role of, or the importance of job descriptions. Why don't you tell us what you think?
Well, I think that because we're in the midst of leadership transition, we've focused probably a little bit more on job descriptions lately, because we've had to rewrite we've had to write the CEO job description because we currently have a two-headed leadership model that has merged into one. So that has also resulted in taking a look again at my job description, and there's been a lot of conversation at different levels about what are the things that I should do, and I'm going to let Dave maybe can add some insight into that too, because he's been part of those conversations about should my role change now that we are going to a different model. One of the things I would say about job descriptions in general, and I've felt this way a long time, is that a job description is really a map, but the map is not the territory. And so the map just says, here's kind of in general what's going on, but we can't tell you that a bridge is going to wash out next week. So you can choose that course, but you may not be able to go there. Like Gary was just saying, if any of us has any kind of outside stressor, like some major computer issue, it's all hands on deck. So whatever you had planned to do that day, that week, that month, that's now disrupted. Merger activity, hiring a group of laterals, getting some opportunities that you hadn't anticipated. Those are all things that I think those of us in our roles, in the role that Gary and I are both in, we have to be sort of first responders a lot of the time, so you can plan, but then there's also a huge level of response that you have to do as well.
Yeah, makes sense. David, would you agree with that assessment for your role as CEO?
Yes, very much. I support and I appreciate the concept of a map and territory. Here's what I think is that as lawyers, we've found success, and we would not advise, at least I wouldn't in my practice, which seems to have gotten some good results over the years, for clients to do anything meaningful without writing it down. We know that we also encourage all of our lawyers to have written business plans, written plans. We tell them that if something's not in writing, it probably doesn't exist, so to speak. That concept of a writing is really critical. At the same token, you can't be tied down to the words on the page. We have found right now that we've got a group of leaders in our firm who are fighting with each other about roles and responsibilities, and they're using the development of a scope of work or a job description as the means by which they're carrying on the battle. And it's distracting, and it's taking energy away, and it's becoming, frankly, a waste. And so you can, as any good lawyer can do, we can use words to both assist and crush. And so I do think that we got to be careful with written job descriptions so they don't become the focus. So I really appreciate Denise's concept of a map and the flexibility and smart awareness to focus and reshuffle and prioritize and triage. But we got to have some understanding of who's on first and who's supposed to cover second and what those roles look like.
Yeah, lawyers fighting over the fine print. Who would have thought? Scott, your take on this, particularly in terms of presenting the role of the managing partner to folks who might be new to the role or that may be recruited to serve in that position. How do you convey that if there's not a clearly defined scope of that responsibility?
Well, Oliver, we do that in a couple ways. First, I track all of my time, which is not a difficult concept for me because I'm used to billing time. So all of my time spent on management matters is tracked. So if any of the partners have questions about what I'm doing, they can go back and track it. Another initiative that we started this year, and we're a month behind on, but one thing that we're doing with our administrative team is starting to build not necessarily job descriptions, but for lack of a better word, a user manual. So month by month, listing what we do, what decisions have to be made, from the mundane decision of this is the month we have to reserve the place for our Christmas party, to when on-campus interviews typically start, to when advertisements are due, so that the idea is that after a year or so of doing this with the president administrative team, if one of us were to fall out of leadership or make another career move, that we have something for the next person in line to go on. Because like a lot of managing partners, when I stepped into this role, there was no handbook, there was no guide. If I didn't have the prior managing shareholder around to lean on for advice and counsel, I would have been out of luck. One other comment I'll make, one reason that Gary, one thing that he brings to the table for us, as a second generation firm, we're pretty aggressive, especially in terms of when we look to try and improve processes or innovate. And one thing that Gary allows us to do is when we're faced with a decision, we can say, okay, Gary, how is the market handling this issue? How do other firms deal with this issue? Instead of defaulting back to this is the way we've always done it, we try to look for a new or better way to do things. And Gary's connections with the ALA and the information that he has access to have allowed us to make some different decisions and brought ideas to the table that we as people who, attorneys who are generally concentrating on our clients' needs and looking at the cash sheet daily, don't have the perspective or the information from a lot of other sources to see how things could be done better. So that's my comment on data-driven decisions. I think having access to good information and the way other firms do it is extremely helpful from the management perspective.
Well, speaking of that, let's go to some of the survey results. The Managing Partner Survey found that about 60% of managing partners don't have any kind of written job description, which I guess is consistent with the conversation that we had. Yet on the COO executive director side, about 45% have some form of a written job description. Most of those, the 45%, say that they have one, and they're happy to have it. There's still quite a few, though, that don't have a well-defined job description. But again, you guys have brought up some interesting points about why that might be a challenge. John, how about back to you?
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. And if you're interested in job descriptions, go to managingpartnerforum.org. We have examples of job descriptions for managing partners, big firm, mid-sized firm, small firm, as well as job descriptions for COOs, as well as the ALA's website, alanet.org, has a great section on firm administrators and what they do and how to find the right one. There's also a book called The Extraordinary Managing Partner, available through ALA, a whole, there must be 24 job descriptions in there. And there's another book ALA publishes called The Extraordinary Firm Administrator, which might be helpful to administrators looking to craft exam description. And let's move over toward the important relationship that the CEO develops with his or her COO and the keys to really getting a good working relationship going. And Scott, let's turn to you and your relationship with Gary. And what are you doing and how do you guys affect a really good working relationship?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to communication being the most important thing. That we communicate, but probably equally important is trust. Gary may differ, but I delegate a lot of decisions to Gary that I just don't feel like merit the time for attorneys to worry with. That said, there are probably a lot of mundane decisions, particularly when it comes to aesthetics and brand consistency, that he probably wishes I didn't spend as much time on. But I think the key to that relationship is learning what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and also learning what's critically important to each of you and trying to have a good understanding of where you can make decisions and make things easier and where you may need to tread lightly. And so I think that communication and trust are the biggest two elements that I can think of that are important in that relationship. And the thing that, the other thing is going through crisis together. I think you can't get into a situation where you play we, they, or blame one another. You've got to have one another's back, even if you may not have agreed with the direction or decision that was going to take place. Once that decision is made, then the two of you or the leadership team needs to stick together and make sure that they have each other's back.
Communication. How do you guys communicate? You sit down once a week and go through an agenda? You just lots of texting back and forth? Your offices next to each other? How do you communicate?
Our offices, we actually moved our offices to be closer to one another so that we walk in and out of each other's offices several times a day when we're both in the same office. But because of the fact that we both move between offices quite a bit, we do text quite a bit, and we do talk on the phone quite a bit. I would say that most days we're talking, texting, emailing, and if we're in the same place, talking face to face. But we don't have.
So you don't have a set calendared meeting every week, every 2 weeks, something like that. It's more informal, back and forth, ongoing stuff.
Correct.
Let me jump over to you, Dave. Okay. Dave, how about you? What do you think the keys are to a successful working relationship with Denise, your COO?
Well, it's like any good relationship. It involves trust and building some trust and having some candid conversations so that you can rely on each other, whether it's good news or bad news. We talk a lot. We also have formal meetings set every couple of weeks. They get moved around some, but at least they're on the calendar and have to get begged off or moved. But Denise and I finished last night with a meeting that was a brief meeting to cover a few hot topics. We have a formal meeting tomorrow afternoon, and I suspect that between this moment and tomorrow afternoon's meeting, we'll probably meet again. So constant communication is critical, whether it's weekends, a brief email, a Monday night. We work hard to try to catch each other's rhythms because everybody needs a break, but staying in touch is pretty critical.
And Denise, any advice you might offer to managing partners, since most of our audience are managing partners today? What advice might you give to managing partners to build that trust, that communication, that got your back type relationship?
I think that being candid, like Dave said, is really important, and just not being afraid to have a tough, what you might perceive as a tough conversation. So if I, as the COO, am not doing something that you really need me to do, it would be really helpful to know that. It just isn't helpful to not know that. I also think it's important to, as a CEO, to make yourself likable. You know, be kind, be interested, be engaged, open, have some humor. Don't take everything so seriously. You know, just be a real person. And I would say Dave excels at that, especially the humor department.
You know, that's a great advice. If we can't sit back and laugh from time to time at what goes on, we go crazy, wouldn't we? And Gary, what advice might you dispense to a CEO on how to get that good working relationship going with the COO?
Yeah, I echo what Denise had just said. One about also being likable, but I also think that you know, making sure that what you say is what you're going to do. I think that trust is just like in any relationship, whether work or outside of work, that trust is key to making sure that you feel comfortable with each other. But that trust also does mean that there are difficult conversations, or there are going to be a disagreement, or that there's going to be two different ways of thinking, and that's how you build that stronger bond, is working through some of those discussions, feeling confident about each side, and then coming to a decision, and then sticking with that decision and going with it. But I agree with Denise that, you know, we're here a lot of hours, and you have to have that personal connection as well. You have to be, you know, the person where an attorney or a shareholder can walk into your office and sit down and talk to you comfortably and have a good conversation, whether it be about what happened this weekend or what he feels about the way the firm is ran, and that you can actually, you know, have a good conversation with them versus just being stoic and taking things too serious and not being responsive. You all of a sudden become that outside person where nobody really wants to talk to. And so, Denise, I think that was a key attribute that that the leadership in this position can bring to a table.
A couple of survey results before we move on to closing remarks. We asked COOs and administrators to whom they report, and 55% report directly to that CEO. I pity the poor administrators who have to report to all the partners. That's 18% of you getting pulled a million different directions, or to a committee. 21% of you, again, may be conflicting and getting conflicting instructions. I like the direct solid line report between the CEO and the COO. We also asked about participation at executive committee meetings, and 85% of administrators claim to be active participants at the table, involved in the conversation, part of that leadership team. We'd like to see those numbers higher. In terms of participation at partner meetings or shareholder meetings, less so. Less than 3/4 of firm administrators claim to be active participants in those meetings. Again, we'd like to see COOs at the table, leading, involved, part of that leadership team. And Oliver, let me kick it back to you for your kind of final catch-all conversation before we wrap things up.
As we end our conversation, I wanted to get some final words of wisdom from each of the panelists. So, Dave, what guidance or advice would you give other law firm CEOs and COOs to be more effective in these very challenging positions that you guys have?
We always strive in our professional lives to succeed by using the right tools and not trying to make a person an inanimate object. The COOs are an awesome tool to help the law firm get results. And I think the more we can show our partners results, the greater support they're going to give us to keep managing in a professional way.
Great. Scott, how about you?
I'll echo something John said a few minutes ago, and that is allowing your COO to be active and involved in executive committee meetings and shareholder meetings. I think one thing, when we went out to the market and hired someone with experience in legal administration like Gary, we brought in a valuable tool, and the last thing you want to do when you have a highly effective firm administrator is put a muzzle on them. So I think Gary would say he has pretty free will. We expect him to tell us his opinions on the decisions we make, And sometimes he'll tell us much more frankly than we probably want to hear what he thinks of decisions made. But
good for you, Gary.
I think it's essential for him to have a comfort level that he can say those things in an executive committee retreat, an executive committee meeting, or in a partner meeting. So that would be my best piece of advice: is to allow your administrator to have a strong voice in what you're doing.
And Gary, how about you?
Yeah, Scott, one of the things that drew me to this firm was the conversation that we had during the interview process was the fact that they did want someone in this position to be able to give their opinion and give their advice. Being in the position for a period of years, you gain some knowledge and you have some experience, and you also see a lot of things. But being part of John's group and ALA, you get a lot of information about what's going on in the marketplace as well, and being able to bring that to a firm and then have them at least hear you during the conversation about what's going on in the marketplace or if decisions are being made. I think that having that frank conversation is important, but having the knowledge about that frank conversation, or at least having the data to explain why that conversation is going on and why you have come to the conclusion you come to. And so I think it's important to not only have that communication, but to also have the data to back up that communication. That's how that trust is built.
Makes sense. And finally, Denise, anything from you?
So one of the things I started with when I joined Schwabe almost 5 years ago was I told Dave in a meeting one day that my stance, especially when I was new, was to question everything. And I remember watching him write that down on a piece of paper. That became kind of the mantra for the year. I still try to do that. It's easier to do when you're new. It's harder to do when you've been there for a while. But when you question everything and when you're allowed by the CEO to question everything, it opens up that window of what should we be doing versus what we've just always done. So that has been I think that's a really important role for the COO to play.
Great stuff. And John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you to our panel. I thought we could go on all afternoon. I love this conversation. It's so important in these times. Our advice to the managing partners: you are the CEO, you're the vision, you're the big picture, typically outward facing. And at your side, you need a trusted, competent, effective COO to focus on the operations and the day-to-day and stuff you as managing partner shouldn't be doing. And encouraging firms to value the contributions of non-lawyers. I don't like the term non-lawyers, but we hear it often. You get the right people in these roles, empower them. It can be a game changer and really make a huge difference in the performance of your law firms. If you just get the right people, let them do their jobs, don't micromanage them, but really listen to the voice, bring them to the table. It really can have a huge impact on your firm's profitability and sustainability. Taking us out, some resources, our Managing Partner Forum website. We've got some great articles and survey data. I run the Remsen Group website as well. ALA, terrific website. Oliver, there's some things in there people should look for if they're interested in learning more on this topic on the ALA website.
Absolutely. Yes, as you mentioned, plenty of resources, lots of great books that you can use, articles from our Legal Management magazine. We've got compensation and benefits survey information, as well as information, as you mentioned earlier, on our job bank with details on how to go about hiring a legal administrator if you're looking for someone to be your COO.
And we've got Scott's and Gary's website, Clark Partington out of Pensacola, Florida. And thank you guys for being with us today, and also the Schwabe Law Firm in the Pacific Northwest. Dave and Denise, thank you so much for being with us today as well. I'll put together some recommended reading. These are some books I often suggest that managing partners get a hold of. Again, more and more importance put on leadership and governance models at law firms. You're not running a hotel for a collection of individuals, but we are a firm. If we work together towards shared goals, big things can happen. I'm sure each of our panelists would be happy to chat with you offline. Here's their direct contact information. So please feel free to follow up with any of them. I think they'd be happy to chat with you about what we discussed today. Thank you again to our panel. Your feedback really important to us. As part of our program, we'll be sending you an email with a link back to an online survey. Please tell us what you thought about this program in particular, and about future programs, topics, speakers, format. Real interested in putting together material and information of interest to law firm leaders. So please tell us what you think, and we do pay attention to that stuff. And finally, if you'd like to contact us, here's my information. Feel free to reach out, and we'll try to be responsive to you as well. So thanks everybody for being with us, and Dalen, let me kick it back to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your participation. As we mentioned before, these sessions are recorded and will be archived on the MPF website, managingpartnerforum.org. As always, we value your feedback about this session and your input for future programs. Please be sure to complete our brief online survey. And thanks again for your attendance this afternoon.